The arrival. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of the Westfield Martial Arts Academy as Amanda Johnson stood before its entrance. At 42, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength, though she deliberately kept her movements understated. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a crisp blue GI with a yellow belt tied neatly around her waist. Amanda had moved to this suburban town just 3 weeks ago, seeking a fresh start after her previous life had become too complicated. She hoped to find peace here and perhaps rediscover her passion for martial arts in a simpler environment. The Academy's website had mentioned that walk-ins were welcome during afternoon sessions, so she decided to take the plunge. As she pushed open the heavy glass doors, the familiar scent of discipline and dedication filled her nostrils. The dojo was spacious, with rich wooden walls adorned with traditional Japanese calligraphy. Red mats covered the floor, and a heavy blue punching bag swayed gently in the corner from a previous training session. Several students in white GIs were already practicing, their movements crisp and focused. Amanda watched them with practiced eyes, noting their techniques and breathing patterns. It had been 2 years since she'd last stepped foot in a dojo, but muscle memory never truly faded. "Can I help you?" a voice called from across the room. Amanda turned to see a stocky, bald man in his mid-40s approaching. His white GI was immaculate, and a black belt with golden embroidery hung from his waist. His stern expression suggested someone accustomed to authority. "I'm interested in joining your classes," Amanda replied politely. "I just moved to the area and was hoping to get back into training." The man looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her yellow belt with obvious skepticism. "I'm Brad Hoffman, head instructor here. What's your experience level?" "I have some background," Amanda said modestly. "It's been a while though. I'm hoping to shake off the rust." Brad's expression suggested he wasn't impressed. "Yellow belt, huh? What style did you study before?" "Mixed training," Amanda answered vaguely. She'd learned long ago that being too specific about her background often led to unwanted questions and assumptions. Another instructor joined them, a lean man with dark hair and sharp features. His black belt bore similar golden details, marking him as another senior member. "Carlos Rivera," he introduced himself with a nod. "New student, potentially," Brad replied, his tone suggesting reservations. "She says she has some background." He emphasized the words with barely concealed amusement. Amanda felt the familiar prickle of judgment she had encountered throughout her martial arts journey. Some things apparently never changed, regardless of which dojo you walked into. The dismissal. "Well," Brad said, crossing his arms as he studied Amanda more closely, "I suppose we could let you observe today. See if you can keep up with our training standards." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Carlos smirked beside him, clearly enjoying his colleague's subtle dismissal of the newcomer. "I appreciate that," Amanda replied evenly, though she could feel her jaw tighten slightly. "Should I warm up with the class?" Brad let out a short laugh. "Lady, our warm-ups would probably wind you. Why don't you just watch for now? See how real martial artists train." Several students had paused their practice to observe the exchange. Amanda noticed a few younger women among them, their expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity. One teenager looked particularly uncomfortable with the instructor's dismissive tone. "Actually," Carlos chimed in, "we were just about to work on some advanced sparring techniques. Nothing you'd be ready for, obviously, but it might give you an idea of what level we expect here." Amanda's eyes flashed briefly, but she maintained her composure. "I understand. I'll observe quietly." "Good choice," Brad nodded approvingly. "Martial arts isn't like those cardio kickboxing classes they have at the gym. This is traditional karate, requires real discipline, real strength. Not everyone's cut out for it." He gestured toward a group of male students stretching nearby. "These guys have been training for years to reach this level. It's not something you just pick up as a hobby. Maybe you should consider starting with our beginners class on Tuesday evenings," Carlos added with a patronizing smile. It's mostly housewives looking for some light exercise. Might be more your speed. Amanda felt heat rising in her chest but forced herself to remain calm. She'd encountered this attitude countless times before, the assumption that her age, her gender, her modest appearance somehow predicted her capabilities. What they didn't know was that she'd spent the last 15 years mastering techniques they'd probably never even heard of. I'll keep that in mind, she replied diplomatically. Brad turned to address his students. All right, everyone. Let's show our visitor what real karate looks like. Carlos and I will demonstrate some advanced combinations. As the two instructors moved to the center of the mat, Amanda settled onto a bench against the wall. She watched their movements with professional interest, noting their form, their timing, their obvious pride in displaying their skills for what they assumed was an inexperienced audience. They were competent, she had to admit. Their techniques were solid, their stances proper. But there was something performative about their demonstration, something that suggested they were more concerned with impressing than teaching. Amanda folded her hands in her lap and waited. Patience, after all, was one of the first virtues she'd learned in martial arts. The challenge. The demonstration continued for 20 minutes, with Brad and Carlos showcasing increasingly complex combinations. Their movements were precise, their strikes powerful, and their obvious satisfaction with each technique made it clear they expected to be impressed. That's how it's done at the professional level, Brad announced, barely breathing hard as he faced Amanda. Takes years to develop that kind of control and precision. Very impressive, Amanda acknowledged genuinely. She could appreciate skill when she saw it, even when it came wrapped in arrogance. Carlos wiped sweat from his forehead with a towel. Most people don't realize how much dedication real martial arts requires. It's not just physical, it's mental, spiritual. You have to completely reshape how you think about conflict and control. I imagine so, Amanda replied quietly. Actually, Brad said, his eyes narrowing slightly, why don't you tell us more about this background of yours? What exactly did you study, and where? Amanda hesitated. She'd hoped to ease into training without having to explain her history. Various disciplines. I moved around quite a bit, so I trained at different schools. Various disciplines, Carlos repeated with a knowing look at Brad. That's usually code for, I took a few classes here and there but never really committed to anything. Several students had gathered closer, sensing the tension building between the instructors and the newcomer. Amanda noticed the young woman she'd spotted earlier watching with obvious discomfort. Look, Brad said, his tone becoming more aggressive, I don't want to embarrass you, but we run a serious dojo here. We can't have people coming in thinking they know what they're doing when they clearly don't. It's dangerous for everyone involved. I understand your concern, Amanda said, her voice remaining steady despite the growing irritation she felt. Do you? Carlos stepped closer, his posture becoming more intimidating. Because honestly, watching you sit there pretending to evaluate our techniques when you're wearing a yellow belt, it's kind of insulting. The room had gone completely quiet now. Even the students who'd been practicing in the far corner had stopped to watch the confrontation unfold. Maybe we should give her a chance to prove herself, said a voice from the back. The teenage girl who'd been watching stepped forward. I mean, if she wants to train here, shouldn't we see what she can actually do? Brad and Carlos exchanged glances, and Amanda could see the wheels turning in their heads. They thought they'd found the perfect way to humiliate her and send her packing. You know what, Sarah's right, Brad said with a cruel smile. Why don't we give you a chance to show us what you've learned in all that mixed training? Nothing too advanced, maybe just some basic combinations with Carlos here. Carlos grinned wickedly. I promise I'll go easy on you. Wouldn't want to hurt someone who's just getting back into it. Amanda stood slowly, her movements still deliberately understated. Are you sure? I wouldn't want to disrupt your class. Oh, I think the class would benefit from seeing a real demonstration, Brad replied. Sometimes the best way to learn is to see the difference between amateur and professional technique. Amanda walked to the center of the mat, her footsteps silent on the red surface. As she took her position opposite Carlos, something subtle shifted in her posture, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "Whenever you're ready," she said softly. Carlos cracked his knuckles and assumed his fighting stance, completely unaware that he was about to learn the most important lesson of his martial arts career. The revelation. Carlos moved first, launching what he probably considered a restrained attack, a simple combination of punches that would demonstrate his superiority without seriously injuring the amateur in front of him. Amanda moved like water. Her first motion was so fluid, so effortless, that it took a moment for everyone to realize what had happened. Carlos found himself face down on the mat, his arm gently but firmly controlled behind his back, completely unable to move. Amanda had barely seemed to touch him. "What the?" Carlos started, but Amanda had already released him and stepped back to her original position. "Lucky shot," Brad called out, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Carlos, you weren't ready. Try again." Carlos scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. This time, he came at Amanda with full intensity, no longer concerned about going easy on her. The result was even more spectacular. Amanda's movements were like poetry in motion, each block flowed into the next, every counterattack was perfectly timed, and her footwork was so precise it seemed choreographed. In less than 10 seconds, Carlos was on the ground again, this time having been taken down by a throw so beautiful that several students actually gasped. "My turn," Brad said grimly, stepping onto the mat. As the head instructor, he wasn't about to let some yellow belt make fools of them both. What followed was less a sparring match than a masterclass in martial arts. Amanda moved with a grace and precision that spoke of decades of training, not the casual hobby they'd assumed. She didn't just defend against Brad's attacks, she anticipated them, redirected them, used his own force against him with techniques that were clearly from multiple disciplines. Within minutes, both black belt instructors were breathing hard, sweating profusely, and finding themselves consistently outmaneuvered by a woman they dismissed as a beginner. "Stop," Amanda said quietly, holding up her hand as Brad prepared for another attack. "I think that's enough." The dojo was silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Every student was staring at Amanda with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Who are you?" Sarah, the teenage girl, asked in a whisper. Amanda smiled for the first time since entering the dojo. "Just someone who loves martial arts," she said simply. "I spent 15 years as a Special Forces combat instructor. Before that, I trained in Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, and a few other disciplines. I've taught defensive tactics to military personnel and law enforcement officers." She looked around the room, her expression gentle but serious. "I came here hoping to find a place where I could train quietly, maybe help out with classes if needed. I've been out of the game for 2 years because I was recovering from an injury sustained in the line of duty." Brad and Carlos stood there, speechless, still trying to process what had just happened. "The yellow belt," Amanda continued, "is from a small dojo in my hometown where I started training again during my recovery. I never bothered to test for higher ranks because, honestly, the color of your belt isn't what makes you a martial artist." She turned to face Brad directly. "Respect, humility, and the willingness to learn from anyone, those are what make you a martial artist. The moment you stop learning, the moment you think you're better than someone else because of what you wear around your waist, you stop growing." The transformation. The silence that followed Amanda's words was profound. Brad and Carlos exchanged glances, their earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked remarkably like shame. We. Brad started, then stopped, running his hand over his bald head. "We owe you an apology." Carlos nodded vigorously. "We were completely out of line. We judged you before we even knew who you were." Amanda's expression softened. "We all make assumptions sometimes. The important thing is what we do when we realize we're wrong." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes bright with excitement. Would you consider teaching us? I mean, if Mr. Hoffman is okay with it. Brad looked at Amanda with newfound respect. Actually, I was about to ask the same thing. We could use someone with your experience here. If you're interested in staying, I'd be honored to have you as a co-instructor. Amanda looked around the dojo, seeing it with new eyes. The students were watching her with genuine interest now, their faces reflecting the hunger to learn that she remembered from her own early days of training. I'd like that, she said finally. But I have some conditions. Name them, Brad said immediately. First, we treat every student with respect, regardless of their experience level or what belt they wear. Second, we remember that we're all here to learn, not to prove how tough we are. And third, she smiled, we make sure everyone understands that martial arts is about building people up, not tearing them down. Carlos grinned, extending his hand. Deal. And again, I'm really sorry about earlier. Amanda shook his hand warmly. Apology accepted. Now, who wants to learn some real techniques? The transformation in the dojo's atmosphere was immediate. What had started as a tense confrontation had become an opportunity for growth and learning. The students gathered around eagerly as Amanda began to demonstrate some of the more advanced techniques she'd used in her sparring matches. The key, she explained as she worked with Sarah on a basic throw, is not to use force against force. You redirect energy, use your opponent's momentum against them. Martial arts isn't about being the strongest person in the room, it's about being the smartest. Brad watched from the side, occasionally asking questions or requesting clarification on techniques he'd never seen before. His earlier hostility had been completely replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. As the afternoon wore on, Amanda found herself settling into the rhythm of teaching again. It felt good to share her knowledge, to see the spark of understanding in a student's eyes when they finally grasped a difficult concept. When the session finally ended, several students approached her to ask about private lessons or additional training. The teenager, Sarah, was particularly enthusiastic. I've been training here for 3 years, she said, but I learned more in the last hour than I have in months. Thank you for not giving up on this place. Amanda smiled. Thank you for speaking up when you did. Sometimes it takes courage to suggest that things could be done differently. As the students filed out, Brad approached Amanda one more time. I want you to know that what happened today, it's going to change how we do things around here. You showed us what real martial arts looks like. We all have something to learn from each other, Amanda replied. That's what makes this beautiful. Looking around the dojo that would now be her new training home, Amanda felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the sense that she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes the best fresh starts came from the most unexpected challenges. 3 months later, the Westfield Martial Arts Academy had earned a reputation as one of the most welcoming and effective training centers in the region. Students traveled from neighboring towns to train under Amanda's guidance, drawn by the dojo's new philosophy of mutual respect and continuous learning. And in the corner of the dojo, hanging proudly on the wall, was Amanda's yellow belt, a reminder to everyone that true strength isn't measured by rank or recognition, but by character and heart. The end.